nimshukuru ndugu yangu mkubwa Raila Amolo Odinga kwa kunishika mkono na kuunganisha Kenya mzima, anisaidie kuweka Kenya pamoja, ndio tuweze kwa pamoja tukabiliane na changamoto za taifa letu la Kenya, tuweze kutekeleza mipango ya kilimo ili tupunguze gharama ya chakula na tupunguze gharama ya maisha. Tuungane, tutekeleze ile mipango ambayo itapatia vijana wa Kenya ajira. Tuondoe matatizo ya vijana wa taifa letu la Kenya. Tuungane, tuondoe ukabila katika uongozi wa taifa letu la Kenya. Ndio Kenya iunganike na tuweze kusukuma gurudumu ya kupeleka Kenya yetu mbele. Mimi nawashukuru viongozi wale wengine wote ambao tumekubaliana ya kwamba tunatembea pamoja. Na wauliza ndugu zangu, ile mkataba tumeweka sahihi hapa leo sio kwa manufaa ya mtu binafsi, sio kwa manufaa ya Raila Odinga ama William Ruto, ni kwa sababu ya manufaa na interest ya vijana wa Kenya, kina mama wa Kenya, watu wote wa Kenya. Tuweze kutembea pamoja, tuishi katika nchi yenye haina ubaguzi, tuishi kwenye nchi yenye iko na umoja, na tukabiliana na changamoto za Kenya, tupige hatua ya kwenda mbele kwa pamoja. Ndio leo jameni, tunakuja mbele yenu kuuliza ruhusa yenu. Watu wa Nairobi, mumekubali tuungane, tushirikiane, tufanye kazi kwa pamoja? Hebu nione wale wanasema tumekubaliana tuungane, tuungane, tuungane.
Welcome back to Fireside, the home of politics, policy and polity. Our apologies, we had to take a commercial break under duress because of our reliable partner called Kenya Power. Occasionally they cause blackouts without notice. Now we were discussing roads policy. And we had come to the conclusion that in fact we don't have a roads policy in Kenya. The administration of the day, at their pleasure, they determine which road is going to be tarmacked, and who are the road contractors. By the way, I don't know whether you've ever noticed that engineers have never gone on strike. Road contractors have never ever gone on strike. But I guess that's an issue for another day. What do you make of these concepts that are politicians who are appointed from a particular group? They take decisions around roads influenced by their ethnic nationalism.
It's an unfortunate place to find ourselves in. And that is the main reason why you'd hear people saying hatuko ndani ya serikali, kwa sababu hatujakuwa ndani ya serikali, hatujakuwa tunapata barabara and all those things. So
which is actually the case, because I understand in parts of Rift Valley, people use the tarmac road to dry maize. While in other parts of Kenya, like tea growing areas or coffee growing areas, there's no tarmac.
That's true. Apart Rift Valley and some parts of central Kenya. But it's unfortunate because development is then dished out depending on who voted where. So if your vote basket was full for the president, then you would get more roads. The closest we actually came to having a roads policy was with the Vision 2030, a very wonderful document and program for the country. And it's unfortunate again that those who spearheaded both the development of the Vision 2030 and its implementation in its early stages left the scene. But Vision 2030 had a robust plan on roads and the road network. I remember the plan then was to build, I think, about 2,000 kilometers of road by 2012. And if we were to have stuck on that trajectory, then the road network in this country would be very robust. And the vision then was not talking about a road network that was to be built on the whims of the president or on the whims of politicians. There was supposed to have been developed a road sector policy. And this is way back in 2006, 2007, before the general election. We needed to have had a road sector policy. I think, if I'm not wrong, we ended up having the Roads Act, the Kenya Roads Act, either in 2007. I think the act might have been operationalized around that period after the elections, without a policy in place. So you have an act that establishes, Kenha, talks about Kura and the classification of the roads, but you do not have a policy on how, that road network that was to be built, the 2,000 kilometers of road, is supposed to be set out. And I blame Parliament. We have one of the most important institutions on the face of this world in the name of Parliament. You have individuals who have been elected to champion the voices, the interests of the people in Parliament. Because when you're talking about budgetary allocation to roads, the other day there are people who are complaining that in a particular county, 1 kilometer of road was allocated in the last financial year. And you ask yourself, 1 kilometer of road, tarmac road, what exactly would you be building for the people? Are you building a road that comes from a main highway to somebody's gate, or what exactly are you doing? So the failure, it's true that the failure of us developing a policy has led us to a very bad place. Today, the president, and we make jokes about the president saying, kuna barabara itatoka hapa, kwenda kule. He's not the first person to say those things. Uhuru Kenyatta said it, of course, by proxy through William Ruto. In Kibaki's term, things were a little different because, there was a plan that the constituencies across the country would receive, certain mileages by way of road construction. The same thing happened with Moi's term. Moi would come and say, nimesikia hapa, and this is what Ruto is doing today. Nimesikia hapa barabara yenu ni mbaya kutoka hapa. Amesikia lakini amekuja na gari. The vehicle almost, in some instances, people would push his limo through the mud. And then he would, decide that road would be built. What that did is that you have these political pronouncements. The president comes and says, contractor ameshaingia kazini. The contractor, of course, has been paid a certain amount of money. He has given the kickbacks he needs to.
Yeah, they like saying contractor on site.
Contractor on site. When they say contractor on site, kuna pesa imeshaingia kwa mfuko yao. They are already satisfied. So a contractor who has already paid amounts in kickbacks begins a job, and most of the time, by the way, and this is the other unfortunate bit, you have a printing company that wins a roads tender.
Printing.
So, yeah, these things happen. You go to, you see these placards and signposts.
The construction signage.
You look at the contractor. If you do a quick business or company search, you'd be surprised. You'd be shocked to find out who actually owns these companies. So a printing company gets a tender for a road. They have to subcontract. And they need to make money also, because the entrepreneurship is about making money. They have made their money. The politician has made their money. When the engineer or the contractor actually now comes on site, they have very little to go for the project. So they compromise on quality, they compromise on time. And in the end, after a political pronouncement, a road that was supposed to take a year, after 2 years, nothing ever happened. And you will have another political pronouncement that is followed by budgetary allocation. So citizens of this country have been losing money every 5 years because politicians have pocketed money, unscrupulous contractors have pocketed money, tenderpreneurs have pocketed money, and we have a scenario where regions that are highly productive, as you mentioned, the tea growing areas, you have areas in Nyandarua, for example, there are farmers who have their potatoes rotting. Because they
can't access the market.
The market. In Mount Elgon, for example, farmers have to, you come with a lorry from Mount Elgon, you're carrying cabbages, you have to get to a point, you're stuck, you now contract borders, and you can imagine how long it will take borders to empty a lorry that is, going to a market in Bungoma or even as far as Eldoret.
Yeah, it compromises the supply chain. Yeah.
This has caused us big problems.
Yeah, but at the risk of, so we must run away from that because we may go to the roads policy. But you remember not long time ago, then Deputy President William Samoei Ruto was addressing Chatham House, and he was discussing the political space in Kenya. And he said that nobody understands what is happening in Kenya. Because the government is in the opposition and the opposition is in government, so you cannot actually tell what is happening. And then he accused President Kenyatta then and Mr. Raila Odinga of getting into a handshake, which compromised the institutions of governance. Is recorded to have said that that handshake compromised the capacity of the National Assembly and the Senate to do oversight, because now there's a phobia for criticism. Now, it's the same president who has now entered into an MoU handshake with Mr. Raila Odinga. But this time around, he has told us this is because of national unity. He says that Kenya is bigger than anybody else. And one wonders, what are the risks when you've got the two most powerful political parties and the two most powerful politicians coming into this kind of an arrangement? Where does that leave the common man? Where does that leave Alima? In other words, does the common Kenyan have insurable interest in this MoU? Or this goes back to what in political psychology they call the elite decision making, that the political elite take a decision and they make unsuspecting Kenyans believe that in fact this MoU is serving their selfish interest. In other words, it may be the case that these two leaders are serving their joint selfish interest. So we are talking about President Ruto's selfish interest. We are talking about Mr. Raila Odinga's selfish interest. But now they are making Kenyans believe that the national and public interest is aligned to their joint selfish interest.
That is true. You see, when William Ruto was mentioning that when he was deputy president, I think he had forgotten that he, together with Raila Odinga, had also come a joint government after the 2007 general elections. They also joined government and formed a mongrel that was called a Government of National Unity. So they also came from the opposition and interfered with the way government was working. He was only saying that because he did not want Raila Odinga where he was at the time. But one of the things that the Constitution of Kenya 2010 gave to us was a parliament that was very different from what we knew.
From a parliamentary democracy to a presidential democracy.
Exactly. Well, though even not completely presidential, I think it's quasi-presidential. But what we have is you have a parliament that is supposed to be independent from the executive in terms of exercising its authority. So while in the past you had the opposition, and the opposition was led by the leader of official opposition, in today's parliament under the Constitution of Kenya 2010, there is not recognized an opposition. You do not have an opposition. You only have a majority and minority side. So even in the event that you had UDA, Kenya Kwanza coming in and sweeping across all the parliamentary seats in the country, it was still expected that parliament would oversight the executive. It was still expected that parliament would represent the views of the people. So in our situation, we have ODM, Kenya Kwanza being the minority, though that is still
well, it's an issue.
It's still an issue, but they have almost equal footing. Even when they get into coalition for whatever reason, the Constitution of Kenya says that Parliament ought to exercise independent authority from the executive. Our political reality is a little different. I have held the view, by the way, that if we were to do anything about the Constitution of Kenya 2010, amending it, one of the things that could help us is us having general elections where we elect members of parliament happening in a different period than presidential elections. Because you see, we have a scenario where
staggered like the US model.
Yes, we have a president who is coming in and he's coming in with a fresh team. You risk him coming in with his own majority. He will control that majority because, I mean, government business has to go on. Or if he has not come in with a majority like William Ruto did, he will buy off the majority like he has done even today. So even with this coalition, there is an expectation that Parliament ought to exercise independent authority. Unfortunately, political parties are not doing their bit. And this is the reason that Kenyans hardly engage with political parties. There are very few people who are actually members of political parties and they engage in the affairs of the political parties. In a democracy like ours and in democracies across the world, political parties are the handmaidens of democracy. It is through the party that you nominate individuals who then get to the ballot. For us, our nominations tickets are bought. So the members of the party don't engage in the democratic exercise of nominations. But if Kenyans engaged in political parties, then you'd have a majority calling out the party leader of ODM. In fact, they would have prevented the party leader of ODM from getting into this coalition. Or they would pile pressure on their political party, like it happens in other democracies. Germany is a good example, where individuals pile pressure within the political party. You'd have people resigning, not because they have been faced by their conscience, but because people have piled pressure within the political party. So if Kenyans keep staying away from political parties, then you'll have a few individuals getting into that political party space. They will command politics at that level. And by the way, their political parties are funded by taxpayers to the tune of billions. Yeah, so which Kenyans realize that. Yeah.
But again, you may not blame Kenyans for not joining political parties. Yeah. Because technically speaking, we don't have political parties in Kenya. We have special purpose vehicles. Yeah. So you get a politician from a certain tribe. Yeah. It beats everybody into a pulp, so all of them are aligned, and then it brings people from his ethnic community. Yeah. Because if you arrange all the political parties in Kenya, there's actually no difference in philosophy, in ideology. Yeah. In the West, they would say the party to the left, the party to the right. So you can actually predict that if it's a party to the left, this is what they stand for. For instance, if you're in the UK, if you talk about Labour, you know what Labour stands for. Yeah. If you're talking about Lib Dems, you know what they stand for. If you go to the US, you talk about conservatives or Democrats, you actually know what they stand for. Yeah. Even if you go to South Africa, you can tell what ANC stands for the Democratic Alliance. But in Kenya, it's just powerful politicians who have come together. Yeah. So you may not blame them. And then number two, the party primaries, the way you've indicated clearly. I mean, the party primary is the party leader has got a blank check. Whoever he wants is the one who gets awarded the ticket. Yeah. But as we come to the close of this conversation, where does the Kenyan citizen sit on this? And then number two, does this MoU offer new candidates the opportunity to come and position themselves? Because one of the problems you've identified earlier on under our political system, you spoke about the Western model of democracy, that when you are going for an election, you lead your political party, you lose an election, you automatically resign. Here in Kenya, Raila has lost elections times above number. He has not resigned. He's still in ODM. Kalonzo Musyoka has not won an election. He's still the political party head. But if you are the democracy you're talking about in the West, where you lead you go for an election, you lose, then automatically you resign, that would make sense. But would you say this new arrangement of President Ruto and Mr. Raila Odinga would create an opportunity for other candidates, let's say somebody like Dr. Matiang'i, to emerge and say that I'm offering Kenya a new brand of leadership?
It does. But you see, unfortunately, you now have two sides. You have the side that is represented by William Ruto and Raila Odinga, and then you have or let's say three sides. You have the other side, still same cut from the same cloth, represented by DAP, PLP, and that whole outfit. Yes. But they're not any different. So these are not new people. Even if we talk about Matiang'i, he's part of the political establishment. But there is still an opportunity for new people to emerge.
Okay, let me rephrase the question then.
Yeah.
You know, when Mr. Donald J. Trump said he wanted to become the president of the US, people rolled their eyes, said, you've not served in the Congress, you've not been a senator, you've not been a governor, you don't stand a chance. So in Kenya, is there a chance to get somebody like Donald Trump, somebody who has not been in the political space, who can come and present ideas and people will say, wow, this is a breath of fresh air?
There is an opportunity. But again, you see, that opportunity will have to go against a political culture that has been created by Kenyans themselves. The same thing that happened with Trump, even though for him things were a little different because, I mean, he had to go through the Republican Party. And, you know, without the party, if Trump, for example, had gone independent, he would not have won. So there is a political culture that any new individual, any greenhorn who is coming in will have to go against. Those individuals who have ganged up on the other side, Gachagua, Karua, Eugene, Wanjigi, et al., are individuals, well, with the exception of Gachagua, who are not willing to spend money to fund their political outfits at all. Martha Karua has shown that she cannot spend. Eugene Omalo, the same. They're not willing to spend money. So any individual who is coming in, and it might not necessarily be just one individual, just like in 2002, we may need to have some concerted effort. It may not just be one individual, but, you know, the new individuals coming together across the country. That is the only way that, you know, a new person will emerge and, you know, give the political establishment a run for their money.
But can somebody emerge within 2 years?
It is possible only if the people are tired enough. Because you see, the emerging has to, it has to happen within, you know, certain parameters. So if the people are tired enough, for example, if last year in June, or towards, after June, the protests towards October, if a new person had emerged with grand ideas, well, I don't know what those grand ideas would be, but one who presents as very different from the establishment, very courageous, one who would take on the establishment, they would have had a chance. But between now and 2027, you cannot emerge in 2026. You cannot emerge even in 2027 itself. Politics needs a lot of machinery. So you need some groundwork. Unfortunately, that groundwork involves you having your tribal base, you know,
well secured.
So there is still that bit. But it is not to discount the emergence of new leaders. In 2027, by the way, we may have over 10 presidential candidates. That is a possibility. There are people who...
are you talking about serious presidential candidates or anybody who qualifies to run for president?
People who qualify to run for president. Of course, the serious ones, when we're talking about serious, we're talking about people who have, number one, the qualifications. We are talking about people who have the money. We are talking about people who can marshal and mobilize. That bit, you know, you may be a good person. I had CJ, the CJ Emeritus Maraga saying he has heard about people advising him to run for president and he's considering it. And I pitied him a little because
he's a lawyer?
No, not because he's a lawyer, but because I don't think that he has the capacity to mobilize. Kenyans today will tell you, we want you, ni wewe tu. You would go to the village.
As they told Peter Ken on social media.
Ni wewe tu. Get into this thing and you will see our support. Once you throw your hat in the ring and you discover you are alone. So if you are a good person, you have the qualifications, you have the moral standing or aptitude to run for president, and you do not have the capacity to mobilize, you do not have the machinery, it's not necessarily money, but just mobilization, then it will be pointless.
Well, you know, people elsewhere say that lawyers make for horrible leaders because you don't learn management and you've got high capacities in representing people. But I want to save myself from libel and slander. I will not go into it. I will not go. But From the top of your head, can you name a lawyer who has been a successful leader?
A successful leader. By success, you mean they have executed their office properly?
Yes. And they've gone into the book of records that there was a solid leader.
I would say Kivuta Kibwana was a solid leader for Makueni. I would say Mutula Kilonzo was also a good leader. I would say Wamalwa Kijana was also a good leader.
Now that brings us to the germane question.
Yes.
Is there any qualification that prepares somebody for leadership? Or is this that when you run for office, you go to office, you identify the problems and offer solution? Because, we keep on going to the West. For instance, we are told that John Major, who was a successful prime minister in the UK, he didn't have much of academic qualifications, but he did a very good job. Not long ago, you were told for you to become governor, you must have a bachelor's degree. And I don't know whether there's evidence that when you've got a bachelor's degree, you've got a very good outcomes. I understand even some people went to court and that provision was found to be unconstitutional. So to be president of Kenya, does one need to have a bachelor's degree?
No, you don't need to have a bachelor's degree.
But it's a requirement.
You are above the age of 18.
To be president of Kenya?
You can. I mean, you see, that requirement for having a degree was premised on the presumption that if you have attained higher education at that level, your mind has been exposed to some level. You have engaged with education and knowledge to a level where you can actually lead a diverse group of people. But it's not necessarily so. I mean, we know so many people who have even PhDs that do not merit those PhDs.
But can you go through the IBC hurdle if you don't have a bachelor's degree today?
No, you would not. You would not. For president.
For president,
you would not. I was going to mention that when you asked about the qualifications on leadership, I'm currently reading a book by Dr. John Stanko. The book is called Many Leaders But Little Leadership. And John Stanko talks about leaders, and I agree with him that leaders can be born and leaders can also be made. So there are people who are born leaders. They have the natural attributes. They have the natural temperaments for leadership. But leadership can also be made. You can develop leaders. There are people who have they have not gone to school or through school, but they can make the best leaders. They have an understanding of who, why, and when to lead. And you also have people who have gone to school and they make very horrible leaders. But leadership can also be made. It can also be grown. There are people who decide that they will advance their skills. They will seek to grow in leadership. Now, when you talk about qualifications, aside from the qualifications in Chapter 6 of our Constitution, specifically, and I think where we want to go as a country, we need leaders of high moral standing. And when we talk about high moral standing, the current political class does not meet that criteria. At different levels, they have their own, percentages of how far they have fallen from the moral standard, but they do not meet that criteria. So if you're looking at an individual who will come in and emerge as a new person, they not only have to have those qualifications under Chapter 6, but a high moral standing. But number 3, they must also have the highest aptitude of leadership. Some of the people who would say they want to run for president could not even lead a group of 5 people. Running for president or being president entails very difficult decisions. You are talking about the interests of millions of people. You're talking about political interests, and you have to, to weigh what interests, has to supersede the other, even as you're juggling the national interest. So you not only need a person who has very good moral standing, you can actually be, a person of the greatest moral standing. You are eligible for election as Pope, but you can't lead anything.
Actually, talking about that bachelor's degree requirement is very interesting. It means that somebody like Richard Branson, the owner of this Virgin Empire in the UK, and Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, that those two cannot become leaders in Kenya. They cannot become presidents in Kenya. Never mind that they've got amazing leadership capacity.
Yeah.
But no, another interesting event happened last week, and this is around IMF.
Yeah.
IMF and World Bank are highly regarded institutions, especially to the member nations.
Yeah.
And the Prime Cabinet Secretary and Cabinet Secretary for Foreign and Diaspora Affairs had a conversation with IMF and invited a team to come and do a governance diagnostic. They call it GD.
Yeah.
And the intention is to identify corruption vulnerabilities within across the public sector. And IMF is supposed to come up with recommendations and understand when they come up with the recommendations that are going to be made public. What do you make of the import of that assessment?
First, I laughed when I heard that it was reported that it is Kenya that asked for that diagnosis or for that review. Whether we wanted it or not, IMF was going to do the review, because I think we were due for another tranche from the IMF. I'm not very certain when, but we are due for another loan from the IMF. One of the conditions is that they must do a review. Though, if you look at the IMF policies, they say the member country that is undertaking the review has to collaborate. But you see, we do not have an option. If the IMF says they are going to do the review,
but you know, it's they say that it's voluntary, and then you must not publish the outcome. But what I found interesting about the entire thing is that the administration will not control on who they are going to interact with.
Yes.
The IMF, the mission will meet with all and sundry, including the private sectors. And understand that countries that have done that have come up with a very open system to fight corruption, to fight money laundering, because now you have to be transparent.
Yes.
I mean, I would say as an accountant, it's as if IMF is doing an audit on your governance infrastructure. Because I understand they look at the fiscal space, our fiscal governance, they'll go to central bank, they'll go to financial sector reporting.
Yes.
You know, anywhere where they're likely to establish vulnerabilities, so that now their report, if it's published, then even international investors can actually say Kenya is a good place to invest in.
That's true. What I may see as a slightly, it may not even be positive, the fact that this is coming after now Raila Odinga has joined William Ruto. That means, the wage bill is going to balloon even more, because this means positions. It means that government will be spending more for those political positions. But it is true that the IMF will be meeting even civil society organizations. There is nothing new that the IMF is going to uncover beyond the reports that we already have. We already have the Auditor General's report that has called out those deficiencies in government, not just financial, but also structural, governance and structural deficiencies in government. So I don't think the IMF is going to give us anything new. They're not going to unearth anything new. But what it could do is we, now as a country, could commit ourselves to making certain changes, both in policy and both in structure, for us to receive the funding we want to receive from the IMF. Whether we'll follow through with that commitment is another story. But we are bound to be committed because the IMF is about keeping good books. They're about macro economics. So long as you have those tied down, they have no problem with you. The reason why the Presidential Council of Bookkeepers is very efficient is because they're able to interface with IMF at that macro level.
Presidential Council of Bookkeepers.
Well, I think you may know them as Presidential Council of Economic Advisors. But for them, there's nothing about the economy they're advising.
Just to remind you that I'm a chartered certified accountant. So when you're talking about bookkeepers, you need to be very careful.
But you would understand that bookkeeping and the economic health of a country are totally.
Yeah, those are two separate items. Yeah.
But so the bookkeepers will tell IMF, don't worry, our forex rates are okay, our inflation rate is good, you know, our balance of payments, that is covered, import, exports. But you see, the economy is much more than those macro elements. You have the very nitty-gritties. Are people, you know, do people have the purchasing power to buy food? What is the price of food? So if you're just looking at the consumer price index from that lofty level, the consumer price index has not gone up, you know, for the last several months, and people are starving. It doesn't matter that, you know, the CPI has not gone up. There was a time when the central bank governor was very livid at a press conference, and he was Njoroge then. He was talking about, somebody had asked about GDP, and I think he was very cross and said, the people won't eat GDP. So if your GDP is good, it is doing well, but the people are not eating, it doesn't matter that your books are okay. So the only thing I am confident about this review is that government will now be forced to commit to a plan that, number one, takes care of overspending, because that is a very big issue. That means that subsequent budgets may be leaner. We are also likely to see a fast tracking of, you know, the consolidation of parastatals, the scrapping of parastatals. It is also likely to get us to a point where privatization comes quicker than what we have been seeing in the past. This is something government will commit to.
Yeah, earlier on you said that with Mr. Raila Odinga joining the administration through this MoU, that it's going to increase the public wage bill. How?
You see, when Raila Odinga is coming in, he has people. He has people who should have been in government and are not. And it's not like William Ruto had left certain slots open waiting for, you know, this.
Yeah, but it means that some people will be fired.
Yes.
Like for instance, if you're talking about the cabinet, there's an upper limit. You can't have more than, is it 22 cabinet secretaries? So how will that increase the public wage bill in the cabinet? A few guys will be fired. The positions will be filled by Raila men. But if you're talking about parastatus, a few will be fired, maybe Rigiji's people, and Raila men will come in. So how will it increase the public wage bill?
You see, we will now be hitting those limits where the law says you can have up to 22, and we have 18, you will add 4. We saw with William Ruto when he was coming in, he split the PS positions. There's nothing that says you can't have 10. Yeah, you can't have 10 state departments within one ministry. That is bound to happen. You're also likely to see things being set up. You know, we saw that mongrel called Nairobi River Commission. I think there's something else that is called Nairobi Commission Advisory something. Nairobi River Commission Advisory something. It was also set up. So we are likely to see, you know, positions being created so that people can be accommodated. Even those who are on Rigiji's side. In as much as they will be replaced by Raila Odinga's people, there are people that William Ruto cannot fire because either they hold, you know, they cover too many skeletons, or he needs them. He needs them to survive. So where he can't fire, he will have to create room for these individuals. So that's what I'm saying. The wage bill. The wage bill will definitely go up.
I think it will go up, but it will not be. It will not be massive. It will not be material.
Yes.
Now, talking about this IMF mission, actually, one hopes that one of the key things, and we've been discussing this thing times above number, that Kenya will adopt zero-based budgeting. The CS for the National Treasury, Mbadi, has pronounced himself on this matter a million times, because one of the biggest challenges we have today is we have this sort of incremental budgets. Yes. That if your budget last year was 10 million, then you say next year is going to be 20 million. And it even beats the reason why the people who run the ministries, the principal secretaries, are called accounting officers. Yeah. If you go to zero-based budgeting, it therefore means that the accounting officer has to start from scratch every year and justify every single coin. And also they have to justify the cost, because you may go to your normal shop and you buy this pen for maybe 20 bob, but if it's the government buying, the government will buy it for up to 500 bob because of the amount of the pending bills. And the experts in the financial law in Kenya say that, in fact, pending bills is not supposed to exist because you're not supposed to commit resources if you don't have them. So that is again another chapter for another day. But one hopes that this mission, which was invited by Musalia Mudavadi, would actually assist in placing Kenya in a very strong place, especially for FDI. Majority of Kenyans do not understand that what will take Kenya to the next level is the foreign direct investment. And that is what Trump is doing by saying America first. That if you don't invest in my country and you want to bring in goods, I'm going to impose heavy tariffs because he wants people to invest. In fact, one of the biggest semiconductor companies has now committed to invest in the US, a state called Arizona. And one hopes that this kind of interventions would assist us in that line. Now, before we come to the conclusion, we'd like to get your controversial opinion, provided it doesn't subject us to libel and slander.
My controversial opinion would be drawn from that MoU that was signed by William Ruto and Raila Odinga. And this opinion would be tested in 2027. ODM will not support William Ruto in 2027. The individuals in ODM have the luxury of time, and especially those firebrand, youthful, well, they are over the bracket of youth, but they are youthful members of parliament from ODM. I saw Edwin Sifuna looking very embarrassed and dejected when he was, standing by as the MoU was being signed. And I think one of the things that Edwin Sifuna and the others in ODM are waiting for is for time to lapse and certain individuals to fade away from the political scene, for them to come now and pronounce themselves and say, ODM does not support this government. We only did this because we wanted a stable country, whether they believe in that or not, and they will step away from William Ruto.
But one again can one can come to the conclusion that Raila Odinga is the only person within ODM who has capacity to inflict pain and serve pleasure. That if you decide to walk out of his shed, then probability of winning a seat is almost zero. And you've got many examples. You can start with Raphael Tuju, you come to Anyang' Nyong'o, you go to James Orengo. So that if you're there, Raila Odinga, today that you're walking out of ODM and you're going to run for a political seat without his blessings, then you'll be receiving your pension.
And that's what I'm saying. They have the luxury of time. Raila Odinga does not have the luxury of time. So at some point, Raila Odinga and a few other individuals within ODM will fade out, either naturally, most likely naturally, and those firebrand individuals will take over. So they're just waiting. Unfortunately, by the way, for us, we have this cultural thing, African cultural thing, that if an elder is before you, you have to wait for them to be served first. Hata kwa kunawisha mikono, mtu akikuja kunawisha mikono ananawisha the elder to the youngest, and it has cost us in politics. So you have people who can take up positions, but because there is an elder, they have to wait for them to naturally fade away. And
Wakili, it appears you've not encountered Dr. William Samoei Ruto.
I have.
He pushed out elders in Rift Valley and took over political power.
I have, but you see, it was costly for him. It came at a very big cost. If William Ruto did not have money on his side, and that is why he stuck with Uhuru Kenyatta for the longest period. If he did not have money on his side, there's nothing that he would have done. I mean, there are people who have tried. Alfred Keter has been trying to, but because he does not have the kind of resources that William Ruto has, it's impossible.
And finally, there's an issue that Gen Z raised during the demonstrations about youth unemployment, about the finance bill. But as they were raising those critical issues, then we witnessed the unacceptable introduction of abductions in Kenya. So there have been many abductions. Now, even prior, you remember the story of Baby Pendo. There are people who have really suffered in these the political struggles. Would you say that this Raila Ruto MoU addresses those concerns, or is that now has been placed under the carpet and it's no longer a convenient conversation?
It does not. And one of the things that the likes of Eugene Wamalwa decried when the NADCO report had finally been done was that some of those things were not included. Reparations for victims of police brutality and government excesses. We are unlikely to see those things happening. You see, in 2008, after the post-election violence, the individuals who were perpetrators, direct perpetrators of these heinous crimes were not brought to book. The neighbors who burnt down houses, nothing happened to them. The people who saw their neighbors, rape their children, rape their relatives, are still seeing them today. So we had a cosmetic thing that took us to the ICC, but the individuals who were perpetrators didn't face the law. In all these elections that have been contested, hotly contested, we've had demonstrations, people have been shot. The political actors will come out with what they wanted from the demonstrations. Raila Odinga has always come out on top. He has had his fair share of the pie. But his supporters, if you go to Nyalenda and ask those people, so what have you gotten?
Kibuye.
Yes, and Kibuye. And those people would actually tell you that they have gotten nothing. Those who were shot, those who were injured, those who were maimed, have gotten nothing. Though there are certain court processes that are still going on individually and supported by certain civil society organizations where one or two individuals are getting something out of this process. But it's also a lengthy process. So when you talk about reparations, and Parliament should now be at the forefront because it can only happen through Parliament. Reparations means you need a budget. You need to pay because you need to make people whole. That would mean that everyone who is in court against government, against the National Police Service, against all these government actors, will have to be brought to the table. I will tell them government has now decided on this amount. We'll be paying this amount in reparations. That is the only way that these individuals would get anything out of it. But it cannot just happen for the protests in June last year. You have to go back. But we do not have a history of implementing, those kinds of things. We have a TJRC report that is now, gathered in dust. Yeah. So this has to take very serious individuals, but I doubt that it will be done with this cooperation agreement.
And finally, what would be your advice to? Okay, this term is used in a manner which sounds derogatory, normal Kenyan. Yeah. So one wonders who is not the normal Kenyan.
Yeah.
But what would be your advice to the Kenyan who does not see himself or herself in that MoU signed by President Ruto and Raila Odinga? Would you tell them to remain calm and wait for 2027? Or would you say, as they say in Sheng, wajipe shughuli?
No, I would not tell anyone to wait for 2027. You see, this is what we have been told for the longest time. Nyinyi mulishindwa kura, ngoja uchaguzi yenye nakuja. So those who have won will do everything they want at the expense of the Kenyan. What I will tell Mwananchi today is this, that you still have an opportunity to participate in government. You still have an opportunity to pile pressure on elected leaders. I hope that once IBC has been reconstituted, even if it is just to prove a point, we will have a few petitions to recall members of parliament. There was so much traction that had been gained last year when people were saying we will recall them. Even if it's just to prove
but as a lawyer, it's practically impossible to recall an MP.
It is not practically impossible. It is doable. It is doable. Only that, you see, the other challenge is that, and I've mentioned this here before, that we get tired in shifts. So, mimi na wewe tumechoka, but our neighbors are not tired. So you may have just 500,000 people tired in this country.
Mandera.
Or in Mandera. But they are not enough to take down a government. You may even have 2 million people who are tired. And by the way, that may be the number. It may just be 3 million people who are tired. But still, that is not enough to change government. So unless we can get collectively exhausted with the establishment, things will not change. So we have to stop the exhaustion in shifts.
And that collective exhaustion, I mean, looking at the Kenyan variables, will only take place in utopia.
Unless we face very good oppression. Oppression can actually make you make you very tired. So unless the politicians conspire, as they are used to, and oppress us proper, and sometimes I speak to myself secretly, and I wish we really got to the end of the rope, because I think some people think they have a luxury of letting politicians do what they want, until it now gets to you and your relative cannot access medical services, or you cannot access critical government services, or you're stuck somewhere in a muddy road, you can't get your produce to the market. Until it gets to you, people think, wacha serikali ifanye kenye inataka.
Yeah, your final remarks suggest that you're not a patriotic Kenyan. that has been Fireside, the home of politics, policy, and politics. Thanks for your time. We'd like to apologize on behalf of Kenya Power for the interruption in power supply. Asante sana.